Hey, welcome to another episode of the Get Fit with Jodelle webinar, podcast, whatever you want to call it. These are kind of like my video diaries of things that are interesting topics that I want to share with you. And specifically today, one of those interesting topics is the all meat or carnivore diet. As some of you know, I have been doing this now as part of World Carnivore Month. And I actually started before January, so I've actually been doing it precisely about a month now, because today, as I record this, it's January 26th. So World Carnivore Month hasn't finished out. And I'm definitely not finished because of the results I'm seeing. I really like it. But I wanted to give you kind of my personal journal, if you will, about what I've experienced. So I can't wait to share with you that at the end of this podcast. But I also wanted to kind of explain in a nutshell for those of you wondering, what is this carnivore diet I keep hearing about, or what can I do with this? Could I just simply become more carnivorous? Would that benefit me without changing a lot of the other things I'm doing? Yes, in a nutshell. Cliff notes to this podcast. Yes, you could do that. And then what are some ways to start incorporating it? How do you begin? All of those things I want to touch on today. And I also want to touch on the ethical and the question that a lot of people bring up about, well, should I do grass-fed meat? Could I do conventional meat? What kind of meat should I do? And is there a difference? And so I want to touch on that today. So that's where we're going to jump in at. What is the all meat carnivore diet? And it is exactly as it sounds. You will be eating all meat all the time. Is this right for everyone? Maybe is your next question. No, there's going to be several instances of people, in my opinion, that should not be doing this. Specifically those who don't feel well on an all meat diet. Maybe at some point in time they would, but I always have to bring up the point that if you don't do well digesting meat, the first place you want to look is your gut. Because we are, I will agree with many people out there, omnivores, to where we can eat vegetables and nuts and seeds and grains, but also meat. We have canine teeth, okay, made to rip apart flesh, not necessarily rip apart carrots. But that doesn't mean that you have to eat all meat. You do have the capability of eating other foods. So it's a personal choice. And if you found that in your lifetime you haven't done well digesting meats, but you do digest other things well, it could be that you have low stomach acid. I've done several podcasts on low stomach acid, touting that if you break down things like carbohydrates really easy and you tend to go after those because they're easy to digest, that's because your stomach acid is low, and the stomach acid kind of calls for those things that it knows it can break down. Whereas meat and fats are very difficult to break down. They are the slowly digested foods that take a long time in the stomach. So your stomach's not as apt to, kind of cry out for those things that it knows it's going to have a lot of trouble breaking down. So rule number one might be to get your stomach acid levels under control. And the best way to do that is with things like adding apple cider vinegar to your water, lemon juice, and then also even going so far as to talk to your doctor about supplementing with something called betaine HCl, betaine hydrochloric acid. And this is actually something that as you build up your levels of the supplement, you build up the levels of stomach acid, and that could actually help you digest meat really well, to where maybe for the first time in your life, perhaps you're able to do kind of higher meat content at your meals and you're not having any trouble digesting it. So the next little section is, well, what's the difference between carnivore and zero carb? Because there's a lot of people talking about zero carb too. Zero carb is, you can still have, obviously you're still doing meats and things that don't have carbohydrates technically, although some foods do have like, half a gram of carbs or something. But a lot of people doing zero carb are still doing more things like dairy and eggs and any of the food groups out there that don't have carbohydrates. They might still incorporate those. Not everyone. Some people are on an all meat diet and they still just call it zero carb. So it's just kind of a title or a name. It doesn't necessarily mean that you actually are doing zero carb, because protein will actually convert in the body to a bit of glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis. And I mean, you could technically be on a water fast and get some carbohydrates because your body does gluconeogenesis and breaks down your own muscle to make glucose. So that's a whole nother subject. But what zero carb is more or less a title, just like the carnivore diet. So you can decide maybe if what's right for you. Would you like to incorporate meat and dairy and eggs? And then maybe you're doing more of a zero carb approach versus carnivory is more like just all meat, kind of like if you watch my podcast with Sean Baker, he eats basically 2 ribeyes for breakfast and 2 ribeyes for dinner. And while many of you may roll your eyes at that or raise your eyebrows at that, it is something that needs to be shown the research to. There's a lot of research around eating an all meat diet. And it's just like I spoke about in my podcast that I did with him. Right now is the dead of winter where I live in the Midwest. If I had to go out and fend for myself to eat food, I would have to go kill something. There is no vegetation I could go pull from. I just went hiking yesterday, and I'm thinking to myself as I'm hiking, if I got lost in the woods right now, I could eat a random squirrel. I could eat, some bunnies that I see hopping around, and that's it. There was no vegetation. Everything was dead brown, leaves on the ground, nothing for me to feed myself with. So I would either have to do a water fast and just drink the water out of the streams, or I'd have to find something to eat at some point in time. So when we think of in terms of that, we know that cultures for eons of times have subsisted on strictly just meat. Um, for those of you that want to dig into Weston A. Price's work, he was a doctor or a dentist pretty much back in the early part of the century that went out to many different cultures and looked them up and down, checking them out, mainly checking their teeth and the structure of their mouth and things like that, but pretty much looked them up head to toe. And in a nutshell, found that every single culture that was thriving, not just, surviving off their land, but actually like living well, and their structures of their mouth were so perfect. Their teeth were intact. They had no, upper palate issues, no body issues or anything like that. No, not a lot of sickness and disease. Were the cultures that were eating meat, and a lot of it. He did not find a vegan culture that were thriving. He did not find a vegetarian culture that were thriving. Only the ones that were eating meat. So keep that in mind. Look up Weston A. Price's foundation. Check out what they have to say, because I want you not to just think that this is a trend that you're hearing about, this carnivorous diet and this all meat or zero carb. While it may sound like a trend, there's actually a lot of research and a lot of history behind this. So that's what's important for you to recognize, is that there is research, there is sound scientific research, and I want to see if I can show you some of that right now. So let me see if I can pull up my screen really quickly. Kind of new to this whole screen sharing thing. This is a study that is on called The Big Think. And it's one that I just encourage people to look up, because it actually has a, see if I can move it over. It actually is a study touting, do we need antioxidants? And because that might be one of the questions you're thinking, is how can we survive on just meat if we're not getting our fruits and vegetables and the antioxidants from it? So in a nutshell, you can read through this story on The Big Think, but it's called, if you look it up, it's called Who Needs Antioxidants? No One. There's a lot of studies in here that tout that from a longevity standpoint, there is no need for antioxidants, because you can actually subsist off of them, off of an all-meat diet. Meat actually does contain things like magnesium, calcium, potassium, so you and even vitamin C, you are getting that from an all-meat diet. So that's kind of the myth behind that. But this is a really interesting paper that says, while there is, indication of less DNA damage, the longevity, there was nothing across the board. Longevity was the same whether people ate antioxidant foods or not. This is another study. Let me pull this one up. On PubMed that I discovered that was consuming a high protein diet, because a lot of people have the question of an all meat. If you're just eating meat, that's a lot of protein. Won't I put on too much muscle, or won't that hurt my kidneys, or won't that, cause me to put on weight? And they did this really interesting study on resistance trained athletes that consumed 5.5 times the recommended daily allowance of protein, and found that it had no effect on the body composition. And this was the first interventional study to demonstrate that consuming a hypocaloric, high protein diet does not result in increase in body fat. So you don't have to worry about that. And I will tell you my own personal story with that as well. Here's another one that I liked what it said at the end of the study, where it says consuming a high protein diet. Now this was 3.4 grams for every kilogram of body weight. And you can do your own math on that to discover, what is considered high protein and what would be that for you. In conjunction with heavy resistance training program may confer benefits with regards to body composition. So while it won't make you gain fat, it actually will help get that ideal body composition that you're kind of looking for. Furthermore, there is no evidence that consuming a high protein diet has any deleterious effects. So that was just something I wanted to share with you, and you can look those up yourself as well. The next thing I wanted to touch on was gut health. Okay, so a lot of people are like, well, aren't I going to get constipated? No. It's not just me, it's everyone that's on this will tell you, no, you will go to the bathroom less because you're not having the cellulose fiber from the vegetables, okay, and from the starchy foods that you might eat that really, if you think about it, not that they're wrong or bad to consume those if that's what you're doing, but the excessive amount of fecal matter that comes out is essentially the stuff that your body can't use. So I like to liken it to you have a juicer and you start juicing. You put all these wonderful vegetables and fruits in there and you juice them and you get out the nice, yummy juice. And then you have this whole container of pulp, okay, or leftover from juicing those vegetables. Well, that's essentially what's coming out of your body because your body dissects all of the nutrients it can get out of those vegetables or fruits, which by today's standards, our produce selection is minimal at best, unfortunately. I love to tell people to eat vegetables, but it's almost like you're wasting some of your energy on those because they have more, some of them are sprayed with more pesticides and are grown in improper soil that don't contain the minerals that are really supposed to be in the fruits and vegetables. So you're really getting nil compared to what you think you are. And what's left over is that cellulose fiber that comes out of you. So yes, you might have a little more motility pushing things along, but it's just that fiber trying to get out. We're not really using it. It's just making things move a little better, which I have found personally. I don't have any trouble with motility doing an all meat diet. Maybe that's different for other people, but myself, no. If anything, that you go through an adaptive phase of like maybe you're going to eliminate a little too much, maybe a little too watery right at first because your body's going through kind of a change. But then shortly after that, you regulate to where your body has less poo, but it's still going and it's fully formed and it's not stinky and it's just, comes out just the way it should. And that's a really good indication that your gut bacteria has actually changed to favor the conditions of this. And before this podcast, I tried to look up, there's an individual, I think it's called the Human Genome Project. And don't quote me on that, but it's something to that effect of an individual who had been in some of the rural tribes of Africa and different countries where they only mainly consumed lots of meat, not a lot of vegetables. And he had tested his gut bacteria along the way during all these experiments with these tribes. And he found that his gut bacteria, when he was eating the standard food that they were eating, more of an all meat approach, actually showed improvement in the firmicutes and bacteroides, which are two strains of different bacteria. Like firmicutes are like, they don't make you firm or cute. They make you kind of soft and mushy. They're kind of the ones that help you put on body weight. Whereas the bacteroides are the ones that you want that actually help you with weight loss and with mood and stabilization and feeling good with gut health. And he saw a significant, like in his little pie chart he gave, significant change in his gut bacteria eating more of an all meat approach and found himself, his body was in better shape, leaner. It was easier to maintain his weight. He didn't have digestive distress. So this just goes to show you that there are studies out there and people doing N=1 studies like myself too, that are touting that you could have absolutely no bloating, no gas. You're still going to the bathroom. Your system's in epic shape, better than ever. And believe me, I've suffered from leaky gut and gas and bloating and all of that throughout my history of trying to figure out my health journey. And it wasn't until trying this that, I have no issues whatsoever with digestion. Whereas before it's like you'd eat that one food and you're like, don't really feel that great, or whoops, ate too many Brussels sprouts, something like that, where you're like a little, don't want to be around too many of my friends right now. But with this approach, I haven't had any of that. It's been so pristine. It feels like my digestion should have felt all of my life. So there's that I wanted to touch on as well. And I wanted to touch on mitochondria damage. Okay, so the foods that we're eating that we think are relatively healthy, like the fruits and vegetables that so many people can't imagine giving up. And I myself, you're preaching to the choir here. I, for my whole nutrition career, have touted eat your vegetables, make them a mainstay of your meal. They should be at every meal and every snack and blah, blah, blah. And I still don't turn from that. If that works for you as the individual and you don't have any repercussion with joint health or digestive health or skin health or, brain fog or anything like that, then do that. But notice things about yourself. Like if your health has declined and yet you have created more of a even more optimal diet, like let's say you have now cut out gluten and dairy and this and that, and yet you're still, things are almost getting worse rather than better. Or notice if you're now cleaner eater than ever, but yet you're more fatigued than ever. Then you begin to wonder, is this something that I should look into? Is maybe cutting back on my plant consumption something I can look into? Or focusing on the plants that don't make me feel ill? Maybe there's those few fruits and vegetables that actually you're like, I can do these but I can't do those. Then pay attention to that, because what I'm concerned about is the plant consumption of today that's mostly, a lot of people aren't choosing organic. So you are getting pesticides and chemicals sprayed on the fruits and vegetables that you're buying that are frozen or fresh or whatever. And you're getting this low lying, you almost want to think of it as arsenic, okay? And this could actually be in plant foods too. But arsenic, like, this is how people like gently poison that, you've seen them on forensic files where over time they put little bits of arsenic in somebody's water to slowly poison them over time. We wouldn't think to do that to ourselves, obviously, because we know the outcome. A little bit over a long duration of time adds up to a lot because it doesn't eliminate very well from your body. This is the same with things like with glyphosate and herbicides and pesticides. Yeah, you might be getting a trace amount on your food, but if you're eating that food every day, you're building up the levels in the body to where it's starting to cause mitochondrial damage. And in a nutshell, if you're not sure what mitochondria is, it's the energy factories within most every cell of your body. And they're essential for your health, for keeping you cancer free, for keeping you with high energy, for keeping you from developing all of the Neolithic diseases of today. So it's essential that we start becoming mitochondriacs. And I have a video on this on YouTube as well. It's like how to become a mitochondriac. But part of that is to look at your consumption of foods and make sure they're coming from reputable sources. If you are going to eat plant-based foods, they need to be organic. They need to be not sprayed. And if local grown is available to you, or you can grow your own, even better. The same goes with meat. And that's what I wanted to touch on as well, is like, there is a little bit of controversy out there about, with this all meat approach, is it okay to do conventional? I'm not going to tell you that it's not okay to do conventional meats if that's what you can afford, and your health is the most important thing to you, and you really want to, ease insulin resistance and cut back on the leaky gut symptoms and the digestive bloating that you're having, and really achieve optimal health for maybe the first time in your life from eating more of a high fat, high protein approach. That's fine. If you can only afford conventional, then I get it. But if you can go the extra mile and do grass-fed, grass-finished, wild-caught foods, pastured eggs if you're doing eggs and things like that, or raw dairy if dairy is in your protocol, then please do it. Because not only there's the whole ethical reasons that we can go into, but um, that's kind of a no-brainer. That's not something I have to like immensely touch on, because obviously we want the animals that are giving their lives for us to be treated well, and we want them to have a happy life up until the time that they've decided that I'm fine to give up my life for the good of humans, providing part of the circle of life. And this is like a whole topic that's difficult to talk about with people, because Everybody has their opinions on eating meat and things like that. But for ethical reasons of the way cattle are raised, the way chickens are raised, I mean, for me, it makes me feel a lot better to think that I'm buying from companies that care about their animals and that are raising happy animals and treating them with the respect that they deserve as part of God's creation. So that's a whole nother subject. But the point I wanted to make was a little kind of meme, I guess, I put together that when's the last time you took an antibiotic? You know, if you're eating conventional meats, you had it last night at dinner because the meats that we're eating are loaded with antibiotics if they're just from a conventional, you know, whatever source. And so antibiotics are detrimental to your mitochondrial health, extremely detrimental to causing DNA damage. They're extremely detrimental to your gut health, causing leaky gut and causing a gut dysbiosis of the improper bacteria. And 80% of our antibiotic consumption are found in conventional meats. So that's something to keep in mind is, yeah, you might not think that eating conventional meats are a big deal, but when we're talking about our health and we're actually trying to do this all meat or carnivore approach to improve our health, but yet we're taking in antibiotics at the same time and we're not getting the results that we thought we would, that's something to consider. Okay. Same with grain fed. You know, most conventional animals are going to be grain fed. And if you're trying to go gluten free, you're still getting trace amounts of those grains and that gluten in your protocol, which may prevent you from seeing the best results. So if you're really looking into doing more of a carnivorous approach, whether it's adding more to your meals as far as a higher fat, higher protein consumption, or going completely full into an all meat, you need to look at the sources. You need to make sure that the sources that you're choosing are grass fed, grass finished, the animals being treated ethically, and you're making sure that you're not bombarding your system with antibiotics and hormones and things like that. I mean, talking hormones, it can throw off your system to where you're getting these hormones in your system and yeah, you might feel good gut wise, but yet suddenly you're getting man boobs, or as a woman, you're not seeing the results that you would thought you would have seen on a high protein approach. Maybe you're putting weight on the back of the arms or the thighs, and you're getting too high of estrogens from the meats that you're eating, which is how they fatten up animals. You know, how do we fatten up? As if we get too many hormones, too much estrogen floating through our system. Same thing for animals. That's what they feed. That's what they pump them with antibiotics and hormones. And I mean, they want that marbleization of the meats, and unfortunately, that causes an excess of hormones as well. So these are just things I want you to consider. Is it wrong or bad to choose conventional? No. If that's something that you can afford, or if that's what you can handle right now, then go for that. But I'm just giving you things to think about as time progresses. Maybe over time you'll be able to switch out to grass-fed, organic. Um, then the only other thing I wanted to touch on as far as like when I'm looking at my notes here is how to start. So maybe you're just going to start with one meal a day being all meat. So eggs and bacon for breakfast. That's carnivore, okay, for breakfast. And then you're going to eat normal the rest of the days. And then, you know, notice how you feel. Take note of your digestive health after that meal, or how long you were satisfied after that meal. A good thing that most people are noticing on a carnivorous diet is that you don't think about food as much. So for those of you out there that can't imagine giving up your carbohydrates, or can't imagine eating 2 or 3 meals a day when you normally eat 5 or 6, it can happen and you won't think about food. Like, it's amazing how satisfying fat and protein is. And that's what I've been trying to get across to people on a ketogenic approach. I do a lot of ketogenic approaches with my clients, and they all benefit from that, but even more so with this higher protein meat consumption approach, because we're really giving our internal system so many amino acids, the building blocks of every cell of your body. You know, no matter if it's an internal, you know, neck cell, all the way to a hair cell, an eyeball cell, toenail cell, or intestinal wall cell, they all need amino acids. And when you're taking in ample amounts of those, your body has the ability to rebuild in a way that it's never rebuilt before, from the inside out. And you have so many different things that can be healed from that. So it's really important to look at it from a standpoint of, if I'm not ready to give up my vegetables, totally cool. If you feel great on them, keep doing that. but maybe look at it as, where could I add in more protein throughout my day? And if there's any sort of meat that I like, if I'm not a meat eater, is there that one meat that I do like, then incorporate that. Or if there's a higher protein content of food like eggs that maybe aren't so much meat considered, but you could do more of those to get more of that higher quality protein into your day. So that's a great place to start. Then maybe you're going to eventually, some people like to work up to an all meat day and then a more of a starchy carb day. You could do that. You could work into doing 2 or 3 days all meat and then one higher carb day, or adding in your carbohydrates. I know there was the steak and eggs diet that a professional bodybuilder did back in I want to say the 50s or 60s. Vince Garand, I believe his name was. And he did 5 days on, and then he had a free day where he ate whatever he wanted. So maybe that's more of an approach that would be more of a lifestyle versus just a diet. Sometimes you have to look at these things as, how can I incorporate them to be more of a lifestyle and not so much a diet style, because dieting, if you go on one, you're eventually going to go off one. And that brings me to my next subject of my personal journey here, because while I am on this World Carnivore Diet Month, or whatever you want to call it, World Carnivore Month, I don't consider this a diet, because I'm pretty sure, based on the outcome that I've seen so far, this is something I plan to stick with long term. Okay. And I've heard this from numerous other people that are doing this. So it's really interesting. And there's studies to back it up too. N equals many is a website you can go to, started by Dr. Sean Baker and his associate, to show you actual real-time data from all these different people that tried all meat for 90 days. And actually not just they're talking about it, but their blood work, their statistics, their sleep, their habits, their cravings, their different ailments they were dealing with. It's really interesting to read all of that and see how much people experience on an all meat diet. So me particular, as I mentioned in the podcast with Dr. Baker, I got my period back after 7 months without one, which was a big deal because I didn't realize why mine was gone. So I got that back towards the end of the first week of going carnivorous. And so I found that really interesting, because it was almost as if within the first 3 or 4 days, I felt something happening within me. And then that happened. I was like, wow, this just spurred something on. I had changed nothing else. I also found out from some blood work recently that I have very low thyroid function all of a sudden. And I really culminate this to about two past years of a high plant intake and a very low protein approach, trying to look at meat more as my side dish than my mainstay, and also a very high caffeine consumption. I got a little too lackadaisical with coffee. Didn't add much to it. I didn't put anything in my coffee. But I will say I was drinking quite a lot of it, and I was chasing all of it with water and trying to stay as hydrated as I could. But the stimulant to my body was too much, and I believe it caused a little cortisol issue, some adrenal issues that led to the blowout of my thyroid. So since then, being on the all meat diet, I have already noticed a change in my body temperature. I have a change in my hands that used to be cold, my feet that used to be cold, not anymore. My sleep is vastly improved. It had already improved because of these Swanwick sleep glasses, blocking the blue light at night. That was an amazing help. But after going all meat, I no longer have any issues getting up in the night to pee, except for one time, which I used to be going 5 to 6 times a night. So that's kind of a big deal. I don't really have to use moisturizer anymore. My skin is completely not dry like it was. My hair is actually growing, and I have really long hair, but it's already growing way faster than it was before. My nails, I can't keep up with. They're growing pretty fast as well. These are all little things, but to me, it shows that within 1 month's time, I have seen an amazing improvement in my body composition. I've lost body fat. I've put on muscle, but in a way that the body fat came off with it. So my clothes have not changed other than the way they look on me. It looks a lot better. So that's been really interesting. And I will say that the best thing has been my anxiety. I have struggled with anxiety since I lost my parents. Reason why I do my job as a nutritionist. I lost my parents from stomach cancer and alcoholism. And since that day of being 17 and losing my mom first and then my dad, I've struggled with immense anxiety. And this last month have showed amazing results in the fact that I have no anxiety. Like I can get through an entire day and have no anxious thoughts. I'm very calm. It's as if I'm taking a mood stabilizer every day in the form of like deer meat and venison and elk and grass-fed, grass-finished beef. So I'm really enjoying that. I have this much more happier concept than I ever did before. And I've always been a happy person, but I was still fighting the anxiety within. So I wanted to share that with you. I could go on and on. There's so many different things. I have no joint pain. I have no knee pain. My fingers used to swell. These two fingers here used to swell, and I couldn't figure out why. That's not happening anymore. I don't have any of the knee issues from running because I do enjoy running. So I'm kind of a runner. I will say kind of because I go in spurts because I know that long endurance running isn't the best thing for you, but I still love it. So I like make myself do it sometimes and then not do it other times. But I love it. And my knees were preventing me from that. And why? Because I wasn't doing gluten. I wasn't doing dairy. I was doing minimal amounts of protein and tons of vegetables. So tell me what I was doing that was causing that. I'm convinced now that it had something to do with the plant intake. It was not enough nutrition for me. It was not enough calories for my 5'9" frame. And it maybe have been more along the lines of we have a lot of fiber, but we're not getting a lot of nutrients. You know what I mean? So now I'm getting a lot of building blocks of amino acids and protein. And I hope that if this approach is something you've been considering, that this video is helping you and that you're seeing that perhaps there is some validity to this. There's a lot of research. Like I mentioned on the Sean Baker podcast, go to justmeat.co. You will find a plethora of information about that you can discover for yourself and read about. That's not just me talking, not just Sean Baker talking, not just someone else in the community talking, but really breaking down the centuries of situations and research that's out there about cultures beyond our awareness that have done this long before us. And that this isn't really a trend. I don't see this as a trend. I see it as a healing mechanism that is helping so many people, myself included, that I'm not about to stop. And I don't want to stop. I actually don't have any cravings for any of the foods I gave up. It's weird because I love coconut butter, but I haven't been craving it. I just want meat. So anyway, that's enough about me. I really hope this video has enlightened you in some way to the carnivore approach and how to maybe get started or how to incorporate it in your own walk. And if it's right for you, maybe it's not. Obviously, there's going to be certain instances of people, if you ever have had any kidney issues, maybe now is not the right time for that. Get those kidneys under control, and then maybe you can try more of this carnivorous approach. The last few tips I'll say, if you do want to incorporate it, is aim for fatty cuts of meat, none of this lean protein. So it's not really a high protein diet as much as it is a high fat protein diet. Make sure you're buying the fatty cuts of meat, the fatty steaks, the fatty, dark meat chickens, if you're going to eat chicken and stuff like that. And wild caught salmon that's really fatty, and eating the skin of the wild caught salmon. Okay, so make sure you're getting enough fat. Don't just think that this is more about like chicken breast and eye round and really lean cuts, none of that stuff. So we want the real cuts of meat that if you had to go out and kill something, like I mentioned, going out into the woods, that you would go, okay, here, I got the deer, so I'm just going to chop this up, and this whole, hunk of shoulder has a good amount of fat on it. You're not going to peel that off. You're going to cook it over a fire right then because you're hungry and you're going to eat it. And we were designed for that. Even the Bible talks about God wanted them to put the fattest cuts of meat on the altar back in like the Old Testament days, so that it was a pleasing aroma to him, which I love that, because then it shows us that even God himself knows the value of that really fatty meat that's burning, and you get that really yummy like caramelization smell going on off the grill kind of thing. So anyway, I will end it there and say thank you for watching, and I hope this has inspired you and in some way has given you a newfound appreciation for the carnivorous diet. So thanks for watching. Please reach out to me on patreon.com/Jodelle if you have any questions on this. I'm happy to answer them, and look for more of these. I'll be updating you a little more frequently. So thanks for watching.